I think that's our group. And for today, we will be talking about reflections and intentions. So we all know that the end of the year is usually when people ask you to make New Year's resolutions and reflect back upon your year, but it can be really, really tricky to make time for that. And also, the way that that is usually structured or offered is not always so accessible for neurodivergent people. And in the last couple of years, I've found a lot of help and practice in working with Lana, who for 3 years in a row ran a end of year reflection and a workshop in setting one word intentions for the year. And I started to notice that having a structure for this and doing it together with other people and having a space where it's really allowed to show up just the way you are and do things your own way, even though there are suggestions for how to do it. Um, but everybody's doing it together and struggling with it together. That can be really, really helpful. So I decided this year to host a session of that of my own. So here's what I will hope to cover with you today. Uh, Being more present, creating for yourself an intentional reflection on the past, and then also taking some time to create an intentional future vision where you also think about what is getting in my way, maybe with realizing those goals, and how can I support myself to make progress? What are my strengths and my qualities and my skills? What is my supportive network that I can tap into? And so I'll talk about that a bit in general and about some of the ways that things that might get in our way and how we might work with those. And then we will actually do a reflection on 2024 together, and we will anticipate what do we look forward to, what are we hoping for, what are we hoping to realize in 2025, so that you can have a little bit of clarity of what you will work on and focus on moving forward for yourself. Please, for now, if you would mind sharing in the chat what comes to mind when you hear the words being present. Lana, maybe we can pause the recording for this and then we can share a little bit about what's being shared in the chat. And I think that is why it really helps when it comes to this topic to try and build a practice of having a little bit more integrated presence, where you're able to tap into the future without getting hijacked by all of the fear stories you might have about potential bad outcomes if you fail. Or it can be that you reflect on the past without necessarily getting hijacked by shame or guilt or those difficult emotions, which is by which I don't mean to say that you shouldn't have those feelings, but you can have those feelings and be the observer of those feelings and sort of tap into what they're teaching you. And that means we have to practice. So I highly recommend setting some time aside to look back or look forward for just a tiny bit of time every day or every week. But it's also why I proposed this session, because I think doing it together, body doubling, being with other people who are doing the same thing and who are somehow still calm and regulated about it, can help us as well tap into our own calmness and presence. Body doubling for planning and visioning practices has been immensely helpful for me, also in my work. So I've set up a once a month body doubling session with one of my dear friends, Rita, who's also an ADHD coach. And we do this together. We do our quarterly planning. We work on it a little bit every month. And doing it together helps us not get so sucked into our fears about where our business will go or if we'll be able to make enough money. So again, Lana, maybe for this portion, we can pause the recording in a second, but I'm curious to hear from the group. What are some motivators or demotivators you encounter when it comes to reflecting on the past or visioning for the future? Start the recording. So what I wanted to do is just quickly point out some of the barriers I've encountered in my work with coaching people around visioning or reflecting practices. And then we can also at the end, I'll share some potential solutions as well, and then we can have another sharing moment about what of this feels familiar to you all. So some of the things I keep hearing from clients and people I work with is that the non-specificity of the process. So sometimes the structures are not clearly explained enough. It's just assumed that you know what to do, can make it harder to follow through. Or on the other end of the scale, the questions are just so big and so non-specific. Like, how was your year? That's a really big question. For me, I need that question to be chopped up into little bits, and pointing me towards things to reflect on in order to be able to just chop the elephant up into smaller bits and finish it one piece by one piece. I can't it's too overwhelming for me if somebody just asks me, how was your year? I mean, yeah, in what respect? What are you asking me to think about? This needing to chop the process up into smaller bits and also maybe needing some more time to sense into ourselves and letting things come up. We might need more time that is available in certain neurotypical settings. So even if you join a support group around this, making peace with the fact that you might not get as far as other people, and that in itself can trigger a bit of shame as well. And the exercise can bring up a lot of emotions for people that can be hard to handle. Looking back might trigger judgment, shame, or trauma for you. Looking forward might trigger a sense of hopelessness or your brain going into overdrive on how do I avoid all these negative outcomes that are suddenly popping into my brain. Neurodivergent people that have not had the ability or the time or the support to heal from the trauma of existing in a not very neurodivergent friendly world sometimes really have an overactive inner critic and an underdeveloped inner mentor. And so dealing with thinking about your future and your potential can become a really scary thing. So some potential solutions that might help us is to use a visioning or reflection tool that you are already familiar with. So give yourself the time to build familiarity with the tools that you might want to use. Make sure you are clear on both the process and the intent behind every step, understanding why we need to do certain things in a reflection process or a visioning process can be really, really helpful for a lot of neurodivergent people to be more motivated to actually do it. If there are a lot of big reflection questions, making the question more specific or the span of time smaller. I sometimes just reflected on the last 3 months of the year because I still had much clearer memories around that than around the whole year. Or I would only reflect on work or only on personal stuff in order to make it more manageable for myself. So even if I joined a process or a group that did end of year reflections, I gave myself permission to do only this part of it to make sure that I was able to follow along and do enough working along with the group. We might need more time than is available. So if you are doing a shared reflection in an hour, like we are going to be doing a reflection practice together in a minute, you might only get started and you might want to set up some time for yourself later to come back to these questions and reflect a little bit more. But also being happy with what you can do in the time that is available can be very important there. If exercises bring up emotions that are hard to handle, or you know you are prone to getting emotionally dysregulated, try to find a safe group of people to do this with. Tap into the fact that we are co-regulators, all of us. So if you can team up with somebody that has an ability to emotionally regulate well and do this together with, then that is a really, really helpful service. If you have a toolbox of self-regulation tools like breathing exercises or grounding yourself, take some breaks to re-regulate yourself where needed. So as we will move on to that practice in a minute, I also invite you, if you need to, go take a drink of water, go move around, turn off your camera for a minute, whatever you need to do, that is all allowed and invited in this space. We might deal with these triggered judgment, shame, or trauma. So the long-term solution to working with that is to cultivate more of an inner mentor voice, transforming the inner critic into a more supportive role. I really like Mel Robbins's simple hack for this. It might not be simple to put it into practice, but the solution itself, the turnaround, is quite simple to remember, which makes it easier to put into place. But if you find your brain going down all these doom scenarios of what might happen, asking the question, but what if it all works out? What would that look like? What would be happening if it did work out? What would I be doing if it did work out? Can help you tap into more of an inner mentor voice and let go a little bit of that inner critic voice. Again, emotional regulation here comes into play. So soothing your younger parts or your past self from last year, if it triggers guilt or shame about how you handled stuff in the moment, and focusing more with that inner mentor on, okay, but what did I learn from that situation, can be helpful. And when it comes to this sense of hopelessness and this overactive inner critic, it might be helpful that then you in the now knows more than ever before, and it has more skills than you ever had before in your life, even if what you're reflecting on was only last week. Just the fact that you're sitting down and you're thinking about this situation, you have put aside a little bit of time to analyze what happened, how you responded, what results that gave you. That is skill building. That gives you more knowledge. It gives you more skill than you've ever had before in your life. So take that with you in figuring out what future outcomes might be. And also the sense that doing this reflection is actually giving you more skills and more knowledge than you ever had before. It's really, really easy for our brains to go into the simplified process of just taking all of the negative experiences from our past and projecting those out into the future. But very often you've grown a lot since having those negative experiences. If you engage with a practice of visioning or reflecting and you find it challenging, connect to those close to you that hold hope for you. I very often, if I engage in these practices, I have the immense luck that I work in a shared space with my husband. So after doing an hour of my quarterly planning, I will frequently bring him a cup of coffee and go collect a hug. So I also reinforce myself in that sense that I seek out emotional support for doing something that's quite hard for me, even though it serves me in the long run. So that's part of potentially building a practice of taking care of future you to feel more competent about your longer term goals as well. That's it for now. I would like to hear a little bit if you connect to any of these hiccups and potential solutions and do some more reflecting questions. So Lana, if you can post. And also another skill or tool to tap into that can really help you reflect and do visioning is emotional agility. Lana and I have been working on a toolkit that hopefully will be released very, very soon. And I have another slide coming up around that as well. But I think emotional agility, so being able to experience high emotion, but also being able to shift into new ways of dealing with that emotion and responding to that emotion, being able to re-regulate yourself where needed is such an important skill. There are some other helpful structures. Like I said before, for a lot of people, mental models can be really, really helpful. Understanding what mental visioning model or what model for reflection and why it's useful you are using can be really, really helpful for us to follow through on doing it. Understanding why we need to do this or why we need to do it in a certain way can really aid our motivation in being able to then follow through and execute steps or structure to follow. And I really like that it was pointed out earlier that if that becomes too constrictive, we can also really lock ourselves in, so that if the step or structure that are provided for doing this are not a good fit for you, that can be a really a part where we get to stay stuck. So seeking out different types of ways to do this until you find one that is helpful and useful for you is also really, really important. Not every structure will fit for everybody, but trying out different kinds of pre-created worksheets or questionnaires or structures to do reflection or visioning in can be really, really helpful. Another really, really helpful thing can be self-concordance. And this was really vital for me as a neurodivergent person, because until I learned to see my strengths, my needs, my core values from the perspective of being neurodivergent, I was always still a little bit at war with it, because so much of what I would now see as my strengths, needs, and core values was labeled as weird or strange or out of the ordinary, that it made it really hard for me to build self-concordance with my future visioning and goals in alignment with those things, because I was still a little bit at war with my own neurodivergent self. But once you have that, you have a good view of what your strengths and your needs and your core values are. Bringing your visioning practice in line with those things can also really, really help build the motivation to actually follow through and do that on a regular basis. The general structure for reflecting and visioning I will be following today with you is to, first of all, do a neutral description of the context, actions, and outcomes that you are reflecting on. To, there's somehow sneaked in a little bit of a naughty square there in my presentation. I apologize. To then, with curiosity and judgment, add in some guesses about what might have been going on there, what was the causality, what happened, how I respond lead to this outcome, what were my emotions, and doing some value assignment. So, am I happy with that outcome, or could that be better? Valence is if something is something that you would want more of, or that you would want less of, for instance, or that you would want to get away from, or that you would want to get closer to. That's what valence means. And then trying, based on those causality guesses and your emotional signals, to extract some lessons from the past. And then finally, in the future visioning, trying to connect those lessons to your plans and desires for the future, and based on putting those together, determining some actions that you want to take moving forward as next steps. So let's get started on that. I would invite you to take a little piece of A4 paper and turn it landscape wise and create a little timeline for yourself in a format that comes natural for you. If that means dividing the timeline up into 4 quarters or into smaller amounts of time like months, do what feels natural for you. But try to write down at least one significant experience on the timeline for each quarter of the year without giving any emotional meaning to it. So don't judge things as good or bad yet. Give you all a couple of minutes to do that. And anytime you feel you have a question or want to share something that you would not want included in the recording, just let us know and we'll pause it. So if you're having some trouble bringing up things from memory, for instance, I'm having a hard time thinking what my first quarter of last year looked like. You could maybe also go into your digital calendar or your paper calendar and flip through it and see if anything is brought to mind. Remember, you can always rewatch this recording later and go back through the steps and take more time for each of those steps. But for now, let's see if anybody wants to share. And if not, then we'll move on to the second step. That's fine, Emma. Just so the second step would be to now look over your timeline and some of the things you've written and where you can add an emotional component. How did you feel about those things? Would you generally give them a positive or a more negative rating? Add a little note about your insight about your emotions and try to not just make a little note about the negative ones, but include some wins and some positive emotions, no matter how small. 2 more minutes to finalize that step. And before I ask for shares, I want to just quickly let you know why I am specifically building in a separate step for reflecting on the emotions related to these events. Emotions are very important signals. They should definitely not be suppressed. Even the negative emotions, those are the ones we tend to suppress a lot. But usually they tell us very important things about ourselves, about our safety, about our boundaries, about our needs. And so it's very important to tap into those emotions and see what they can help you understand about your life. For instance, I wrote down in the second quarter that I had a lot of grief and also a lot of busyness around preparing for the fact that we are getting rid of a place that was really, really important for me in my childhood. That property is getting ready to be sold. And for me, that brought up a lot of grief, a lot of anger, a lot of fear as well, because that was a very important place for me to also do a little bit of an emotional reset for myself every year. It was a place where I could go and be without any of the frustrations and uh, difficulties of the rest of my life, like my working life or my family life. And so I will lose that space. But tapping into the feelings around that helped me see that I actually do need also in the future to think about how will I prepare for that space not being there anymore, and how will I serve the same needs that I was serving in that place in different ways in the future. And that sets me up with a whole list of potential actions to take for this year to make sure that um, I tap into what was important for me about that place, and I serve the needs that were being served there, even if that place is gone in the future. Lana, if you are available to pause the recording, maybe I can do it on this. I think if so, step 3 would be to extract some learning from those events and the emotions that you signaled. Maybe take another sheet of A4 folded paper, fold it in two, and write out the glows and grows connected to those events and the emotions that you made notes of. Make an extra effort there to extract some positive lessons out of the negative emotions. And here is a list of some suggestions for things that could be put in the glow category or in the glow category around these events that you made notes of. So in the glow section, you might reflect on what was an event that you're proud of handling with grace. What were some actions you took related to the event that had a good outcome? What were some compliments maybe you received or reflections from others that you value and want to hold on to? What are some tools or resources on the grow side that you know you'd want to use next time something similar happens? On the grow side as well, what are some strengths that you could have put into play that you have, you have, but you in the moment were just not able to put them into the situation? What are some skills you might want to build for the future to get better at handling these kinds of situations? I'll give you another 3 minutes. As we said, this is just a taster for the process. You can always go back to the recording on the Neurodiversity Education Academy and go through the process yourself and take more time for each of the steps. So in order for us to finish on time, I'm going to have to cut this short a little bit. So I'm going to ask you, you can always, of course, go back to your events and create another A4 paper, put the event name at the bottom and put the glows on the left and the grows on the right. Is there anybody at this point that has something to share about what they discovered so far? To restart recording. And we will move on to the final section. And I've cut this step 4 into 2 sub-steps. First of all, map a future vision. So take another A4 sheet of paper, do a timeline for 2025. Again, in any format that feels natural to you, if you want to divide it into 4 quarters or into months, or just like divide it in half and think about the first half of the year and the second half of the year, and that also works. Try to write down some events that you know are coming up in this year that will be important to you. And it can also be roughly sort of something that might happen in that period of time. Maybe think of some things you want to make time for or dedicate intentional energy to in a certain period of the year and put those on the timeline as well. So that's our first step. And we'll set another 3-minute timer. I actually forgot I can put a timer on screen. Apparently, can't do that while I'm screen sharing. Doesn't look like. Okay. If you're done putting some things on the timeline, time for the second step. Connect some of your learnings from the previous sheet with some of your intentions and events that are coming up on the timeline. What do you want to keep in mind throughout the year as these events occur? When are you making time for your goals and intentions? What are some ways you can create a little mini action plan, like Enrique just did, about how you will take that learning into the future? And I'll give you an example. I have Neuroemergence coming up in June of this year, and Lana and I will be organizing a live event for the first time. We've done it so far only as an online gathering, and I definitely want to get busy with planning and breaking down all of the steps in preparing for that. Also, in my reflection, I noticed that the November till February of the next year period for us is usually a really stressful, very busy period with lots of family birthdays, but also all of the winter celebrations. And I want to make a plan for how to make that period fit much more with our family needs and my own needs, find ways to do what is expected, but also sometimes say no, and make sure that we do it in a way that is really beneficial for all of our family members. I'll set another, we're going a little bit over time, but I'll set another 3-minute timer for this. And then we will quickly move to closing the session. Lana, can I invite you to pause in the interest of brevity, I will skip the reflection that we normally tend to do. Why is my mouse being funny? Sorry. This is the way we normally reflect because we have limited time, I'll ask you to put in the chat a 1 sentence or 1 word reflection on what you will take away from this session. And while I give you some time to do that, I will also tell you to please check out our other offerings. We hold almost monthly community meetings. They're all up on the events page of the Neurodiversity Education Academy website, which is a .org website, by the way. So if this was in any way beneficial to you and you hope to join us for future events, to check out what Lana has already put up on the website and see if there's any other sessions you would like to join. Already see some wonderful reflections coming in. I will hang around for a bit uh, longer for those who can stick around. And for now, I wanted to at least end the recording, wishing you a healthy 2025 full of self-kindness, and still wishing you a happy winter, even though we're past the darkest days already by now.